What is the church teaching on the great Catholic monarch and the end times? Do you personally subscribe to it? Why or why not?
Well, that's a very good question. Firstly, there is no official dogmatic teaching that every Catholic has to subscribe to on the end times or on prophecy. Let me say that straight out. To be a Catholic, you have to accept the four creeds and every article of them. That's the minimum. Just so our studio audience will know, we're talking Apostles, Nicene, Athanasian, and the Creed of St. Pius IV, or the Council of Trent. No, not St. Pius, just Pius IV, the Council of Trent. Those four creeds, plus the three infallible definitions since that time, the infallibility of the Pope, the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, and the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, damn it, that is all a Catholic has to believe to be a Catholic. We forget that. And I know a lot of people, I'm certainly not saying my question is like this at all, but I'm just mentioning, I know a lot of people who were very assiduous in pursuing prophecies, but didn't really know what was in the creeds. And it's easy to fall into because the creeds are kind of dull. We take them for granted. One of them we say every Sunday at Mass. The other we might say every day with the Rosary. And I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, the only Son, our Lord. We forget how revolutionary and exciting those things are, and really how subversive of the culture and society in which we live. But I digress.
Mm-hmm.
So, the question is the great monarch.
What is that derived from? Where is he drawing from?
Now, it's drawn from the prophecies of a large number of saints. And in broad outline, again, in broad outline, they have a lot of similarities. Basically, the idea is that a great monarch will arise toward the end of time, when the church and the world are just in terrible shape. This great monarch will arise, and he will be by descent, they say in the later versions, both a Habsburg and a Bourbon, i.e. the two great Catholic houses of Europe. He will restore the unity of the great Holy Roman Empire, long since smashed, to a little bit like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll make all things new, as it were, collaborating with the Pope at the time. And then again, it varies, but some accounts have the Antichrist emerging toward the end of his reign, and his doing battle with him and losing.
Oh, wow.
And then you have the reign of the Antichrist, and then the second coming. Now, but again, you have other versions that say something differently. You also have sort of a prefiguring, as it were, in that sort of prophecy, in various folk beliefs about the great king who will return. King Arthur, or Charlemagne, or Frederick Barbarossa, the sleeping king, or the last emperor Byzantium, Blessed Constantine XI, the hidden emperor, the sleeping king, who will come back when his people need him. Do I believe in this? Again, I have what I can only call suspended judgment. I don't believe in it the way I believe in. I don't believe in it the way I believe in the creeds. I don't believe in it the way I believe in the period of peace that Our Lady speaks of at Fatima, and Russia spreading her errors throughout the world and all that, because that's a bit of a higher source. And it's, even got a feast day attached to it. But neither do I discount it or disbelieve it. The problem of prophecy, frankly, is that very often it's visual, and these holy persons will see things, but there often is not any kind of explanation. And for me, the typical example is Blessed Anne Catholic Monarch.
Yeah.
And she had a vision of people sitting around their houses looking at a little box out of which the devil came and spoke to them. Well, imagine a cloistered nun from early 19th century Germany seeing a modern family watching Game of Thrones. What would she think? That, in fact, was what she saw.
Yeah.
I mean, and in a sense, she's right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's not the devil speaking directly. He said, "Hi, gang, I'm down here in hell. It's painful. I don't like it. I want you to join me." But there's a sense in which she's quite true, quite right. But not the way it appears.
Yeah.
And similarly, with Our Lady of Fatima, which those prophecies, of course, have a great deal of weight. But remember how they actually worked out, those that have come to pass. She said, if people don't, this war will end, but if people don't straighten up and fly right, another and worse will take place in the reign of Pope Pius XI. Now, there was no Pope Pius XI at that time. It was Benedict XV. And who knew when there'd be one? But in 1922, Benedict XV dies, Pius XI is elected Pope. Now, if you knew about the prophecy, and a lot of people did, you say, oh my gosh, it's Pius XI, head for the hills, a new war is going to break out. Yeah, and it did in 1939, the last year of his reign. So if from 1922 to 1939 you'd been hiding out in the hills, fearful of the coming war, well, that would have been a lot of time you'd wasted. But we look back, and we can see how those prophecies made absolute sense. So the problem I have with prophecy, if it be a problem, is that it always makes much more sense in retrospect than looking forward. And all of these prophecies, what do they all have in common? Well, they all call on us to do our duties as Catholics. How will you weather the storm? Well, you'll say your rosary, you'll go to Mass, you'll fulfill the duties of your state life, which we should all be doing anyway. You will not find a single prophecy that calls on us to do something really bizarre. All right, everyone, put tin foil on your heads and go outside wearing. No. But if you try to use prophecy to govern your business life or your educational plans, you'll always come a cropper, because that's not what it's for. It's to remind us that God is outside time and space, that everything around us is limited and fleeting and passing, and that our religious duties and our civil duties, which seem, again, so boring and lackluster to us, are extremely important. We don't know how they're important. We don't know how it affects things. But I mean, time and again, you'll hear various seers speaking, approved seers, I gotta emphasize, speaking of how, Our Lady has held our Lord's anger back and so on and so forth because of people doing his saying prayers and so on. Absolutely great.
Isn't there a sort of pragmatic application, at least in this prophecy, in that it instills hope in society that we will not just go gently, that there will be a restoration?
Yeah, it does. And of course, there very likely will be a restoration of some kind. The problem is we can't know what.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you an example, let's pretend for a second that you and I were St. Ambrose and St. Augustine.
Oh, no.
And we're talking about the state of affairs of the empire. Well, the state of affairs is everything's going down the tubes. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's really not in a good place. Well, we know as Catholics that there's hope for the future. And there is. But there's no way that you or I could ever have predicted Clovis, the barbarian king whose baptism 300 years after that led the way to the restoration of the empire of the West. There's no way we could have known that.
Mm.
And if I had come to you some years later when, although the Romans were not really aware that the empire had fallen, but when the emperor of the West was deposed and the barbarian who took over sent his crown to Constantinople to say, well, now we're back to one emperor. But if I had come to you and said, have faith, my son, there will be an emperor of the West again. Well, all right, that's great, but believe me, you would not have had Charlemagne in mind under any circumstances. So, will there be a great monarch before it all goes to Florida? I sure hope so. Do I hope to live to see him? No.
Why not?
Because that would mean the Antichrist was around the corner.
Well,
I mean, I don't want to be around for the last days. if I die beforehand, I will be, of course. I mean, listen this way. In one sense, we'll all be around for the last days, but I would rather have my eternal destiny, please heaven, sewn up than go through it.
Okay.
Now, it might be that going through it is what I need. It could be I'm such a schmo that I need that kind of abuse to save my soul. And if so, then all I can do is say, okay, great, thanks. But I hope that's not the case.
Okay.
Because the last days will not be pleasant. Everyone tends to think of them in terms of the bad guys getting their own, getting what they deserve. Yeah, well, the good people get smacked around a lot too. And secondly, who's a good guy and who's a bad guy? I mean, my joke. Remember a couple of years ago, this Protestant minister, declared the rapture was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened. And so he said, "Oh well, it's happening some months later." That happened. Then I guess it was wrong. My joke at the time was he was right. The 144,000 were raptured. Now stop and think. 144,000 out of 2-3 billion on the planet.
Yeah.
Nobody would miss them.
Yeah.
And the fact that you and I weren't raptured ourselves and don't know anyone who was says a lot more about us than it does about them, doesn't it? Yep. The fact that the minister wasn't raptured tells us a lot. So maybe it did happen. It's just that you and I are, well, left behind. Like Kirk Cameron.